This whiteboard asks, why pitch? Most sound we hear doesn't have a uniform tone. Footsteps, running water, rustling sheets, all that stuff is just noise. It's a bunch of waves with no clear pattern. What separates pitch from noise is that it's periodic. The amount of time a pitch takes to get from peak to peak or valley to valley is always the same. Cool, so if this was called what music, then that would be it. That's the answer to what pitch, but why pitch? What are some things that can make pitch? Insects. Flies beat their wings so fast that they make uniform fluctuations in the air. But let's face it, we cannot compete with flies. Their muscles move faster than ours ever could. Another thing is ceiling fans. If you twist something in a circle, then add blades to that thing, your uniform circular motion can turn into periodic waves. Have you ever listened to the note of a ceiling fan or held a fidget spinner up to your ear? But in order for that to work, first you'd have to invent the wheel, then you'd have to spin it with considerable force to get it moving fast enough to make a pitch. So, what other options are there? This medium, the rope, has only one boundary, only one thing that can stop waves from moving. That's this, it's my hand. The rest of it's completely loose, and I can make any kind of waves that I want. If I choose some rhythm, some specific frequency to shake it at, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, there you go, there's nothing stopping me. But right now, this can't make pitch by itself. It only carries whatever pitch that I make. And unless I can shake this thing like 100 times a second, we're not getting audible pitch from anything unless that thing does the pitch generation all by itself. So what do? We add another boundary. When a wave reaches a boundary that it can't pass through, it gets reflected and comes back to me in the other direction. But there's something else happening over at that knot. The wave that I made doesn't look the same when it comes back. It gets inverted, meaning that if I send out a peak, it comes back as a valley. And if I send out a valley, it comes back as a peak. And this is relevant to pitch, I swear. Waves don't always invert when they reflect. For example, if I make a wave in this tub of water and it hits the wall, it's going to come back the exact same as it was before. Make a peak, and it stays a peak. The difference here is that even though the wall is a boundary, it's a soft boundary. Soft boundary is when the wave is free to move vertically against the boundary. So even though it gets stopped by the wall, it stays a peak, and so it remains a peak when it comes back the other way. That knot is a hard boundary. It can move up, down, in any direction. All the upward force of my wave is getting transferred into that knot, even though it's never going to budge. Now, do you remember Newton's third law? Every action has an equal opposite reaction. Right, well, the rope is exerting an upward force on this knot, the knot's not moving, and so it's reacting with a downward force. And it's that downward force that gets transferred back into the rope and comes back to me as a wave. And it takes about a second, maybe less than a second, for my wave to reach the knot, and it takes the exact same amount of time for the wave to come back to me. There's an inherent rhythm to that, right? About every second, there's a reflection of the wave. I could ignore that rhythm, I could choose some other frequency to shake this rope at, but what I'd get in return is chaos. What happened at the end there? Now that there's two boundaries, every wave I make is going to reflect multiple times. So one wave might get reflected, come back in the opposite direction, and run into another wave. They're either going to double up or cancel out. But since I'm choosing some random frequency, all the waves are interacting at these random spots. The shape of the rope is going to look something like this, and it's not going to stay that way for a long time, it's always going to be changing. There's nothing uniform about this. My waves are interfering with their own reflections, and the result is just this mess. But what if I paid attention to the inherent rhythm that I was talking about earlier? And what if I time my shakes so that I only add a new wave once the first one has reached the knot? What would that look like? 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right. Since there are boundaries on either end of this rope, That means that there's a specific frequency that I should shake it so that each new wave adds to the one before rather than canceling out. This is the resonant frequency of the rope. You've seen the kind of waves I can make by myself. They're not that big. But by the end there, it was just one big wave moving up and down. Let's do a play-by-play. Alright, so the first one comes down the line, and at the exact moment it reflects, I make another valley. Watch what happens in the center. When two waves meet, they interfere with each other. And these two are both valleys, so they double up. And just as those two reflect, I add another wave. This time the peak is bigger than it was before. And at the middle, the three waves add up. This continues with more and more waves, and the point at the center gets higher and higher until you can't distinguish the smaller individual waves anymore. There's just one big wave vibrating in place. These kinds of waves don't travel like most waves do, so we call them standing waves. And we have names for the parts of a standing wave. Here are the nodes. Node stands for no motion point. They are the spots where you'll never find any vibration. And here's the antinode. This is the spot with the most motion, both the highest part of a peak and the lowest part of a valley. Let's try the same experiment, but in a medium with soft boundaries instead of hard. This is how long it takes for a wave to get from one end to the other in this water. One, and... Alright, hold on. Look really carefully at the way this wave moves. I didn't look carefully enough, and that's why I'm doing this part in voiceover. There is a peak, yes, but it's followed by a valley. Remember the fabric that I did, where as soon as I make a peak, a valley comes behind it. That's what's happening. But what we're looking for is how long it takes the first peak, not the peak and the valley, to reach the other end. So what we're actually seeing is, we see 1 and 2 and 1. So this is how long it takes for a wave to reach the other end. And so I'm going to make a peak, valley, peak, valley, peak, valley at this rhythm. Let's go. And 1. Here's the standing wave, and it's almost falling over the edge, but it looks different. The only difference between this and the rope is the type of boundary, whether or not waves invert when they reflect. I was doing essentially the same thing to both the rope and the water, but let's see how this one played out. I make a valley the same time the first wave reflects, but this time the first wave doesn't turn into a valley. So what happens when they meet in the middle? Instead of doubling up, they cancel out. Since the tub has soft boundaries, the waves are allowed to double up at the ends. So instead of being like a rope where the ends are still and the doubling up happens in the middle, the tub is the opposite. Doubling up at the ends and nothing in the middle. So in this one, there are antinodes at the ends and a node in the center. They're both standing waves, they just have different boundaries and therefore different shapes. This string also has a resonating frequency of 146 hertz. That's wavelengths per second. If I could add tiny little waves to one end, that wave would go all the way across the string, reflect, and then come back to the bridge, all within 1/146th of a second. I can kind of add tiny little waves, but just with my own singing voice. It is a lot like the rope or the tub. Each new wave adds to the one before it, continuing to double up, until eventually there's one big standing wave going up and down. If I can pull it off, that standing wave starts in the middle, goes up, down, and then reaches the middle again every 146th of a second. But just for a control, I'll start with some random frequency. So if this is the resonating frequency, I'll sing ah. Did you get anything? All right, let's try it with the real resonating frequency.
Riveting!
I rest my case. So why pitch? Because when you put boundaries on a medium, that medium can resonate. A string, a flute, any instrument really, is just a medium with boundaries. But you don't play instruments by adding little waves on one end. So how does this property of resonance actually turn into sound? In other words, how pitch? Thanks for watching. Please like this video, and if you want to keep up with the series, then subscribe for a new episode every Thursday.